There is an image that no one who lived through that day can get out of their head. A man with his head down, walking slowly toward the penalty spot, carrying the weight of an entire country on his back, carrying the weight of 24 years of waiting, carrying the weight of 3 World Cups that ended with a broken heart. And when he struck the ball, the goalkeeper went the right way. The ball went up, over the bar. And the silence that followed lasted only a second, because right after came the scream. The scream that all of Brazil let out at the same time. The scream that woke up neighbors, that stopped cars in the middle of the street, that made people who had never spoken to each other embrace on the sidewalk as if they had been family their whole lives. Brazil were 4-time world champions. And the story of how they got there is far deeper, far more human, and far more cinematic than any screenplay could invent. To understand what the 1994 World Cup meant to Brazil, you need to understand what the 12 years before it had done to the soul of Brazilian football. These were not just defeats. They were defeats with meaning. Defeats that left scars. Defeats that made an entire generation of Brazilians begin to wonder whether the 4th title would ever come. In 1982, Brazil arrived in Spain with one of the most beautiful squads football had ever produced. Zico, Socrates, Falcao, Cerezo, Jr. A team that did not play to win. It played to enchant. And it enchanted the entire world throughout the tournament, until the day it met the Italy of Paolo Rossi in the group stage. Paolo Rossi had spent 2 years away from football under suspicion of involvement in match-fixing scandals. He returned to the 1982 World Cup having barely played, apparently out of form, apparently in no condition to be anyone's protagonist. And then he scored 3 goals against Brazil on an afternoon those who watched it will never forget. Brazil 3, Italy 3, and Brazil eliminated because in that format a draw was not enough. One of the greatest squads in football history went home without the trophy. And the world became a poorer place. In 1986, in Mexico, Brazil returned with another generation of stars. Zico was still there, older but still brilliant. Careca was scoring goals. Socrates was still philosophizing with the ball at his feet. And the squad reached the quarterfinals against the France of Michel Platini. It was one of the most beautiful games in World Cup history. It finished 2-2 after extra time and went to penalties. Zico, who had come on as a substitute in the second half after recovering from an injury, stepped up to take the 3rd penalty. Goalkeeper Bats saved it. Brazil lost the shootout. And Zico was left with that image forever. The greatest Brazilian player of his generation, the man who would have been the Pelé of the 80s had injuries not stolen the best years of his career, leaving a World Cup without the only title missing from his story. In 1990, in Italy, Brazil arrived once more. A different squad, a different generation, but the same expectation. The world expected Brazil. Brazil expected itself. And then, in the round of 16 against the Argentina of Maradona, a moment that still provokes debate to this day. Canigia received a ball in behind, goalkeeper Taffarel came out poorly, and Argentina scored the only goal of the game. Brazil were eliminated. Maradona kissed the pitch. And Argentina went on to win the tournament with a goal that many Brazilians still argue over to this day. The wound of 1990 was different from the others. It was angrier, more bitter. Because there was a feeling that that World Cup had been stolen, not lost. 3 World Cups. 3 eliminations. 3 generations of players who went and came back without the trophy. And 1994 arrived with a question hanging over Brazilian football that nobody wanted to ask out loud but that everyone was asking in silence. Was Brazil still capable? The 1994 squad was completely different from its predecessors. It did not have the romanticism of 1982. It did not have the individual genius of 1986. It was a pragmatic, organized, physically powerful team, built by coach Carlos Alberto Pereira on a principle that the Brazilian press despised from day one. First do not concede, then score. The Brazil of 1994 was solid, efficient, and often dull to watch. It was the exact opposite of what the average Brazilian expected from the national team. And it was precisely for that reason that the tension between the team and the fans never fully disappeared throughout the tournament. But there was Romario. And there was Bebeto. And when those two were on the pitch together, all of Pereira's tactical organization gained an extra dimension that no coach in the world could have planned. Romario arrived at the 1994 World Cup after an extraordinary season at Barcelona, where he had been voted the best player in the world. He was compact, explosive, with a nose for goal that seemed supernatural. Bebeto was his opposite in style, more elegant, more technical, more patient, but equally lethal in the box. Together, they formed one of the most efficient striking partnerships in World Cup history. And there was Mazinho. And there was Mauro Silva. And there was Alder and Marcio Santos in central defense, one of the most solid defensive partnerships Brazil had ever sent to a World Cup. And there was Taffarel in goal, who had lived through the nightmare of 1990 and arrived at 1994 with the quiet determination of someone who has a debt to settle. And there was Cafu and Leonardo at fullback, two players who represented completely different worlds of Brazilian football but who functioned within that system with an almost mechanical precision. Leonardo. That name needs to be said carefully, because the story of Leonardo at the 1994 World Cup is one of the most complex and emotionally charged in the history of the Brazilian squad. A skillful, intelligent left-back with rare technical ability for his position, Leonardo was one of the most important pieces in Pereira's system. And then, in a group stage match against the United States, Leonardo committed a foul that changed everything. An elbow on midfielder Tab Ramos that left the American with a fractured skull. The red card was immediate. The suspension was for the rest of the tournament. And Leonardo left the pitch with the expression of someone who knows they have just made a mistake that cannot be undone. The Brazilian squad lost its first choice left back for the remainder of the tournament. And what happened after that revealed something about that team that went far beyond tactical considerations. Because Brazil did not fall apart. Brazil reorganized. Branco took over at left back with a quiet competence that few had expected. And the squad moved forward as if the loss of Leonardo were a test that group had been waiting for to prove it had depth and character. The 1994 World Cup was held in the United States, a country that at that point still treated football as a second-tier sport, relegated to amateur leagues and children's academies. FIFA had chosen the United States as the host in a long-term bet on the sport's growth in the American market, and the decision had generated intense criticism in the football world. The heat was suffocating in many of the host cities. The stadiums were converted American football arenas, with the pitch cut through the middle to fit inside existing structures. It was an improbably American setting for the biggest event in the most universal sport in the world. And it was in that setting that Brazil built its campaign game by game, with a consistency that the national press did not know whether to praise or criticize. The victories came. Romario's goals came. Bebeto's goals came, including the one against the Netherlands in the quarterfinals that entered the collective imagination of world football not for the scoreline but for the celebration. Bebeto scored, ran to the middle of the pitch, and made a gesture of cradling a baby in his arms, celebrating the birth of his son Matthias. Romario and Mazinho ran to embrace him and repeated the gesture. One of the most poetic images football has ever produced, born not from a script but from a father who could not contain his emotion. The semi-final against Sweden was difficult. Romario scored the only goal. Brazil went through. And then came the final. The final that Brazil had been waiting 24 years for. On the other side stood Italy. The same Italy that had eliminated Brazil in 1982. The Italy of Roberto Baggio, who had arrived at that tournament as the best player in the world and who had carried the Italian squad on his back throughout the whole tournament, scoring decisive goals when no one else could. Roberto Baggio was more than a footballer. He was an almost spiritual figure, with his distinctive ponytail, with the calm of someone who has practiced Buddhism for years, with an elegance on the pitch that made people stop whatever they were doing just to watch. The clash between the Brazil of Romario and the Italy of Baggio was, on paper, the perfect confrontation for a World Cup final. And then the final played against expectations in the cruelest way possible. Because 0-0 after 90 minutes meant extra time. And 0-0 after extra time meant penalties. For the first time in history, A World Cup final would be decided by a shootout. It was every supporter's nightmare. It was the scenario nobody wanted, and that happened anyway. Baresi took the first penalty for Italy. Baresi, the captain, the central defender who had returned from knee surgery, performed during the tournament itself to play in the final. Baresi struck it over the bar. Brazil were ahead. Marcio Santos stepped up to take the first for Brazil. Goalkeeper Pagliuca saved it. Level. The penalties continued, each one carrying the weight of an entire country on the shoulders of the players walking toward the spot. Albertini converted for Italy. Romario converted for Brazil. Evani converted for Italy. Bronco converted for Brazil. Massaro stepped up to take Italy's fourth. Taffarel went the right way. He saved it. Then Bebeto converted. And then Baggio walked toward the spot. Roberto Baggio, the man who had saved Italy in shootouts in earlier rounds of the same tournament. The man who had scored in every elimination round. The man the whole of Italy needed in that moment. He placed the ball on the spot. He breathed. And he struck. The ball went up. Over the bar. Well above the crossbar. And Baggio stood there with a posture that became one of the most iconic images in football history. Head down. Eyes closed. Hands on his shorts. The ponytail falling across his face. A man alone with the weight of a defeat he had done everything in his power to prevent. And Brazil exploded. Not just the stadium. All of Brazil. The streets. The sidewalks. The apartment windows. The bars. The squares. An entire country that had waited 24 years for that moment, that had suffered in 1982, in 1986, and in 1990, that had endured being called outdated and boring throughout that whole tournament, let everything out at once. Romario jumped. Taffarel fell to his knees. Pereira wept. And Captain Mazinho lifted the trophy with a smile too wide for his face to contain. 4-time champions. 4 times world champions. The only country to have achieved that feat at that point in history. And the 24-year wait ended in the most dramatic way possible, with a ball sailing over the bar off the boot of the best player in the world, with a goalkeeper who had lived through the nightmare of 1990 flying the right way, with a people who never stopped believing even when they had every reason to doubt. The 1994 World Cup was not the most beautiful in Brazil's history. It did not produce the football of 1982, still cited today as the most elegant the game has ever seen. It did not have the individual genius of other generations. But it had something that may be rarer than all of that. It had character. It had consistency. It had the ability to handle pressure at its maximum and find a way to win even when the path was blocked. And it had Romario, who was voted the best player of the tournament, and who said in an interview after the conquest, with that unfiltered honesty that always defined him, that he had promised himself he would be a world champion and that he had kept his promise. As simple as that. No unnecessary poetry. Just a man who said what he was going to do and did it. 24 years of waiting ended that afternoon in Pasadena, California. And for those who lived it, for those who were in front of the television that day, for those who went out into the street after the final whistle, that moment was engraved in a part of the brain that forgets nothing. That moment was, for an entire generation of Brazilians, proof that waiting is worth it. That football always finds a way to reward those who do not give up. And that the trophy, when it finally arrives, tastes different when you have waited a very long time for it. If you made it this far, tell me in the comments what this story meant to you. If you lived through 1994, tell me where you were when Baggio's penalty went over. If you are younger and discovered this story just now, tell me what you felt hearing it. And tell me which city and country you are watching from, because this channel receives people from all over Brazil and from many countries around the world, and I genuinely love knowing where everyone comes from. Hit the like button before you go, because it helps the channel keep bringing stories like this one. And if you are not yet subscribed, subscribe now, because there is a lot more coming. Oh, and one more thing. While researching this story, I came across something very special connected to the world of classic football and the nostalgia of 1994 that will make you want to relive all of it. I will not reveal it here, but the link is in the first pinned comment below the video. A curious recommendation, no strings attached, just for those who love this era of football. And before I close, what you just watched is only one more chapter of a story that never ends. Football is full of moments like this one, of stories that seem impossible to believe but that actually happened. And they are coming soon, right here, on this channel. Do not miss them.